Thank you again to everyone for joining us here at DevCon 2020, and thank you to Robert for his keynotes on ArcBlock and our brand new product, ABT Node, something we're actually all pretty excited about here at ArcBlock and are looking forward to having everybody try it out and actually work with it and use it. For those of you who don't actually know me, my name is Matt McKinney. I'm the VP of Marketing at ArcBlock. And one of the focus areas here for ArcBlock has been creating a development environment, a development platform that's both easy to use and very practical. And one of the core ingredients for that we believe is the support of cloud computing. ABT Node by default is cloud native. You know, we support Docker. We're ready for whether it's AWS EC2, whatever it may be. We're designing with that in mind. And I know there's always a lot of discussion about cloud computing, whether it's good or bad for blockchain. And I'm really happy to say that during our next panel, we're actually going to attempt to answer some of those questions and outline why ArcBlock is actually working with cloud providers like AWS, like Azure, like Oro, to really work hard at making it easy for everyone to create, deploy, and manage applications, really making it easier than ever. So joining me this morning, I've actually got Samir Saluja, co-founder of Derive1 and Simile, and Tyler Boscolo, COO of LifeID. I'm really excited to have him here. So maybe to kick things off, you guys, Samir, you want to kick it off with an intro?
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Matt?
Yeah, sure can.
Yeah, good. Yeah. So yeah, I'm Samir Saluja. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And as you mentioned, I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Derive1, which is a market research and advanced analytics company. I'm also, as a proxy, as a co-founder and managing partner of a joint venture that Derive1 has with a partner company, Olson Solomon, called Simile, which is all around advancing metaphor prediction through research. So the metaphors in text with language, in context with language.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing. And Tyler?
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Matt. I'm excited to be here and to chat a little bit about it. But basically, yeah, my name is Tyler. I've spent the last 3 or so years working in the self-sovereign identity space, or the decentralized identity space, over at LifeID. We've been trying to work with standards bodies and a few other services that we've been rolling out. So this is going to be an interesting discussion. I'm really excited for it. So.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Tyler. And maybe to kick things off, what I was hoping to do, and because this is really a topic about, yes, it's a little bit about ABT Node, but it's also it's about cloud computing and the power of cloud computing. And Samir, maybe you can kick it off and just share some of your recent experiences with cloud computing and kind of why you think it's a benefit for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, for us, when we're thinking about sort of a new kind of niche within the market research industry. So we're able to spin up things pretty quickly. Obviously, with cloud computing, that's kind of the benefit of it as far as developing products. So with our Simile work, with Project Simile, we've been able to spin up a platform from which we can advance research methods related to metaphor measurement and metaphor prediction. And so what that avails itself to is the ability to sort of look for other integration points, adopting other services and other services that could potentially be leveraged to either enhance, augment our research or our research methodologies. And so that's, for me, what's great about cloud computing is once you sort of establish kind of that product, then you can look for different integration points fairly easily. On another realm, like in sort of some of the advanced analytical work we're doing, we're looking at we're developing models within natural language processing, which is sort of related to metaphor prediction. And in that, just being able to get various sizes of nodes in research to be able to see, the variance between speed of a model and its accuracy. So those types of things avail itself when you're using cloud computing specifically.
Great, thank you. And Tyler, maybe you can share a little bit as well, and especially with LifeID and Decentralized Identity.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Matt. So the short answer is that, at least with respect to LifeID, there's what we call the on-chain component. So there's all the blockchain stuff. Right now, all of that's running for Ethereum, but then actually the vast majority of the infrastructure is what we call off-chain, and so all of that's cloud-based. So a lot of the tools and the resources that an end user or business would actually integrate in order to, or integrate with, in order to be able to deploy a Life ID-like solution, quite a bit of the infrastructure would be found off-chain or in the cloud. And for everything that Samir said and then some, I mean, cloud is the sort of the holy grail, the end all be all for those types of solutions. It's very scalable. There's so many advantages. So there's quite a bit of synergy in terms of the way that we've architected things and the way that we sort of view the digital identity world, if you will.
So for you, Tyler, and maybe it's probably a good segue to kind of go into this topic and just get the cat out of the bag. From your perspective and maybe some of the challenges you've had at Life ID. I mean, what does it take to convince a blockchain purist of the benefits of cloud and being able to leverage that technology?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a hot point of debate for a lot of people who are the quote unquote purists. I think that if you were to ask a purist as to how information is stored or where things are stored, if it's in a centralized repository of any sort, it's sort of a no-no within the blockchain community. One of the things that we're really intentional on with Life ID is the blockchain serves more as a central point of coordination rather than we're not actually storing a large amount of data on chain. Most of that would be held within a user's device or a few other ways that they may be able to manage that. But I think right now the big gorilla in the room with respect to blockchain purists is how do you manage data? And if you're not doing it in a way that is privacy preserving, that it actually puts the control in the hands of the end user, and you're doing something database, in the cloud or storing in a database, what's the real point? And so when it comes to the argument side of it, or how do you convince someone, I think it's an iterative approach, right? I don't think it's super pragmatic to just assume you can have this, one end of the spectrum, full, complete decentralization without kind of a path to get there. Not to mention the fact that where we are at technologically wise, it's challenging to even utilize that in a real practical day-to-day world at this point anyway. So you have to find the happy medium. And we have our thesis at Life ID is primarily, well, we want to make sure that whatever we do is always privacy preserving. It's always going to ensure that the end user, or in a business case, the data is not stored centrally, however that may be. But we give people the path to take what their current infrastructure is and start on a transitioning road to really get that out of the control of just one entity. And so I think it's an iterative approach. I think it's something that has to be done realistically and pragmatically. And at the end of the day, if you introduce way too much friction, it's going to be impossible to gain traction anyway. So if you're not thinking about it with that approach, purists or not, it's really challenging to build a business around it. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but
yeah, no, it makes total sense. And I think excluding the discussion around user interfaces and user experiences, Samir, maybe from your perspective, you could share kind of the opposite perspective and from a practical business approach or a business evaluation, from your perspective, is there value actually having the purist standpoint or working towards a completely decentralized solution where cloud computing is something that maybe doesn't necessarily have value? I mean, is that something that you would?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, I love getting Tyler's perspective right there. For me, it's kind of like outside of the blockchain domain. So like looking at I'm looking at various different applications of blockchain and market research, and we've talked about this as super interested in that and how we can advance that. But the challenge is always one is there's an endless amount of scenarios. And it's really hard to accommodate that, and you need to have more people working on the standard, or at least kind of blockchain technology itself, and then ultimately having some sort of standard. I don't see how you do that without, broadening that through cloud computing. Now, I don't know, like I'm not going to discount what the purists might be saying. I'll probably defer to Tyler on that specifically. But for me, I would think of, really just from a product standpoint, I want to make sure that that the technology we're building can grow, and I'm really excited about using blockchain. I just want to make sure that it can grow to accommodate a variety of scenarios, and I just don't see how that's possible without making it more ubiquitous or more democratized, I guess, is probably the best way to say it.
Yeah, and and just to kind of interject for a second too, and I think of course, this is ArcBlock Devcon, but I think exactly what we're talking about is part of the reason that ABT node has been created, right? It's a kind of hopefully the best of both worlds scenario where I can leverage blockchain in a decentralized way, but I can also create a very practical product, right? Very real, use the cloud, use whatever type of deployment I want. It kind of leads me to the question, and Samir, maybe I'll drive this one to you as well. Do you think there's a way or a purpose where cloud computing will evolve to become more blockchain-like, where you adopt more features like decentralized identity into cloud computing, as an example? Or
yeah, I've been obviously the blockchain scenarios right now are super interesting to me, and I really want to start, want to develop more blockchain scenarios with the work that we're doing. I do see this as a current moment. Obviously, we're all here on a Zoom call. We're not able to meet in person. There's a pandemic going on. There's a definitive behavioral opportunity here where ultimately it's, the whole purpose of blockchain is to kind of eliminate uncertainty of transactions. And a transaction is right now just meeting somebody, so like the opportunity, I do see a lot of potential right now for blockchain as kind of a known technology and a known quantity to provide solutions in that realm, and kind of making services available across anybody, across all the scenarios that are available on cloud computing. So for me, I hope so. I hope that it starts getting more adopted, at least from a consumer standpoint. From an end user standpoint. And I know a lot more companies might be dabbling in it now than were before, but you really need to see that kind of like adoption happening on a consumer end user standpoint with the services. Right. And so anyway.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And Tyler, I think kind of along the lines of that question I just asked there, one of the things that we're doing here at ArcBlock, we are partnering with AWS, we partner with Azure, Oro, various cloud computing companies, but also one of the things we've done with ABT Node is build in Amazon's Quantum Ledger database, which is effectively a ledger database that has some of the features of blockchain, but is actually more of a database. And I'm wondering, with these types of solutions, and actually another example would be like Alibaba's recent introduction of LedgerDB, can the traditional cloud computing players remove the need for blockchain networks at some point from organizations like whether it's Ethereum, Bitcoin, or do you think there's a balance that will always exist?
Yeah, my personal perspective is that I think there will always be a balance that exists. I think for a lot of business scenarios, they will probably see some level of sufficiency within a solution like the quantum ledger database, QLDB, that Amazon's deployed. But then I think there will be another group of folks who, and it may be a smaller, it will most likely be a smaller segment, for the next 5 or so years, but there will be those that say, well, hang on, we need to take this to another level in terms of really ensuring there's true decentralization for all of the benefits that garners. But at the same time, the reason why I say it'll probably be a smaller segment is that in this current day and age, there are also major drawbacks to that. And so I completely understand. And one of the things that we've been really intentional on over the last probably 6 months or so was developing a larger professional services business within Life ID as an entity. And as we're having conversations with businesses, most of their use cases will probably be, or some of the concerns would be addressed by having this hybrid approach.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you have to take it to the extreme when you're talking to them and say, hey, okay, that may work in this instance, but if there's issue XYZ that could arise, what's the point, and why not take it all the way to the end of trying to do something truly decentralized? And again, there's constraints and there's the challenges that exist there. But I think that you'll have both. I think that you'll have businesses that say, hey, this mitigates risk, or this adds enough value that we see, just stopping at the QLDB side. And then there will be the other people that say, hey, we need to take this a step further for whatever that reason may be. And a lot of it will be case by case. But, what we're dealing with right now is a new technological paradigm. The actual productization of it's quite challenging, as you probably know, Matt. It's really tough to convince the value there, to see, hey, how does this make sense within the productization realm of things? And so, I'm really fascinated with some of these advancements, and I think it will help move people on the pendulum a little further into this new world of blockchain, even though it's sort of a quasi blockchain. But
yeah, it's a great question, and actually your point about the product side, I think, is also a great segue. I mean, Samir, you and I talk about productization a lot, especially as far as blockchain goes. And I'm curious, and Samir, maybe you can provide a little bit different perspective of the things that you would evaluate, right? So if you were to come in and you're evaluating, hey, I want to integrate decentralized identity, I want to integrate blockchain. Maybe what are some of the things that you would evaluate in order to do that? And it's a pretty common. I mean, most companies are going to have some type of steps that they're going to go through to evaluate these technologies. But I'm curious, maybe you could share just some of what your thoughts would be around that.
In terms of a platform, Matt? Or
yeah, if you were evaluating like a technology, and for example, you wanted to leverage decentralized identity, and maybe some of the things that you would consider from the product side that, because part of that evaluation, of course, would be a cost, like, do I have to rebuild my platform? Do I have to leverage some type of new cloud computing? And so I'm just curious from your perspective, things that you would say, hey, I need to maybe look at this.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the developer tool set. I'd be looking at that for my own team, looking at the amount of people potentially in the ecosystem, or the amount of scenarios. I'd be looking at I mean, how easily can you spin this up? Again, from a testing standpoint, building up a sandbox, to then pushing it into production, and then also, I mean, the amount of different services that you can add on to it. So, I mean, the decentralized identity, I think that's kind of the first part. But when we're looking at a variety of different scenarios, I think, I'm excited to learn about what all's available and how easy we can build. Because I mean, I think for us, we're tinkering. We're not at the stage that Tyler is. We're very interested, but we're just tinkering. So it's a little bit different for us, where we want to see how quickly can we advance scenarios and what actually we want to use it for.
Yeah, I think, Samir, I think a lot of people are in the tinkering phase, which is why which is why I'm in total agreement with that. This is definitely an iterative adoption curve that we're gonna be looking at. And I think when you look at, in terms of tools and resources, it's really logical why someone would say, hey, let's take a look at something like AWS, because there's so many tools and resources just within that ecosystem in and of itself. And then you can, add in these other various components. So
yeah, I will. Sorry, go ahead. Continue, Tyler. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it's quite easy for me to understand as a decision maker in a business setting why you would go that route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it just seems so nascent still. Obviously, like, it's a very much, I mean, certain facets of obviously blockchain technology have grown quite rapidly, but other components that we're looking to advance are very nascent and very interesting and new. So I wouldn't discount certain providers for sure at this point. And looking at like, for example, like what ArcBlock has is really interesting for me personally. So
yeah, and you guys, that kind of leads me to the question. I was going to ask you this. So recently we saw the news about Microsoft's Ion, the new network overlay for decentralized identity. And One of the questions I have for both of you is whether blockchain identity, these things become more accessible if it is in fact companies like Microsoft Azure that bring these to market. So today, for example, you have AWS managed blockchain, you have Azure managed blockchain. Do you think from the business perspective that makes it more accessible, or in fact it actually takes away from maybe the premise of what it is that the industry was trying to do when this project started a few years ago?
I'll definitely defer to Tyler on that to start that answer.
I think that if you ask the people that were initially sort of in the industry, the peers, if you will, they would, I don't know if this is totally accurate, but I would say most of them would be a little concerned. They would have a bit of a red flag when a big company like Microsoft. I personally think it's phenomenal. I think what they're doing is incredibly interesting, and they've got such an outreach, and there's so many customers that they could instantaneously say, hey, they turn it on and it's ready to go. So from an adoption standpoint, I think it's amazing. And I think the big challenge is the education component around, hey, why do we need to have a new paradigm for identity? And so Microsoft can really lead the charge. They're going to have more influence than almost anybody in the community. And so I think that it'll help drive adoption. I think at the macro, it's a really good thing. I think there's some purists who may disagree, but generally I think it's probably a big benefit.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I'm excited about the variety of different ways in which blockchain could potentially be integrated, through those companies, with Microsoft, in a variety of different ways that it can become sticky. And the key thing is, like, you have to avail opportunities for consumers to opt in to certain services, and that can be extended with companies like Amazon and Microsoft much more easily, because there's so many touch points they have with consumers. And that's what I see as like potentially awesome, at least for us from a market research standpoint, enabling somebody, knowing that there's this large corpus of individuals that have opted in to at least provide certain types of data that we can, that you can kind of look at, like, for the purposes of market research. And people do that right now through panels, but they might sign up for different panels, and they might sign up for different types of ways in which they can opt in for research. But this way, this allows people to turn on specific components, and it really adds a lot of richness to that potential research.
So do you guys think it by leveraging these technologies from Microsoft or Amazon? I mean, one of the follow-up questions I would have is, do you think it decreases or slows down innovation in the industry, right? Because as you move towards standardization, or even going further and you say, in fact, we're kind of moving back to where we were before, right? You're basically adopting blockchain into the larger ecosystem, effectively turning it into what was already there previously.
I think it could. I think they just the companies need to be careful to make sure that they're enabling a kind of a robust partner ecosystem. Also, really in the spirit of innovation, making sure that the open source communities and all those things are still continuing to be nurtured, and that you're still going to get a ton of innovation outside of those companies, and I think that can't be discounted ever. Personally, I don't know what you think, Tyler.
Yeah, well, to add a little bit of color to it, in some of the early strategy conversations we had as an executive team at LifeID, I brought the perspective to the table that we talked about the solution a lot of times is sort of just Bluetooth. It's this sort of de facto standard for doing an identity or having an identity transaction. You connect to Wi-Fi, you connect to Bluetooth, you use LifeID for an identity transaction. And so while in theory that sounds really nice and it's this large sort of take over the world approach, I always believe that because the productization of it is challenging, what we really needed to do was Trojan horse it through another solution. And ultimately it comes down to network effect. If you don't have network effect, it's challenging to build build a real business around just the technology layer. But in Microsoft's instance, they don't have that problem. They have the network effect, they have all the users. And so I think what will be interesting to see over time is, do they remain true to the sort of the ethos of having decentralized identity or self-sovereign identity? And if they do that, then, and we're continually evaluating them on those bases, then we're going to be in good shape. And we have an article, actually, it's on our Medium page, if anyone wants to check it out, that talks about a few of the pillars that are required to really be considered valuable or actually change the dynamic in terms of self-sovereign or decentralized identity. And so if they adhere to some of those policies and they continue to do so over time, I think it will be very, very beneficial, and it will drive a significant amount of adoption, much more than almost any other company would be able to do. So, and it is super interesting. You know, if anything else, it's just a really fun R&D project, and it'll make a good case study at some point to see, looking back, you know, how it affects the world.
And Tyler, kind of leads me to the question of since we're talking about decentralized identity, and I know Life ID, and you know, we've been partnered with Life ID for better part of almost 2 years now, and
yeah,
you know, how do you bring together decentralized identity, cloud computing, ArcBlock, from your perspective? I mean, what are the challenges that you see with cloud computing? You know, what are the inherent benefits you think that we all get from that? Because on one side of it, for example, you have Microsoft Active Directory, right? And
right.
you know, how does a company or how do organizations leveraging decentralized identity overcome single sign-on experiences?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Matt. The short answer is that, you know, the experience has to be as good, if not better. Ideally, it has to be better, and then add an additional slew of benefits that would make a user or a business want to change from a current existing solution. And then, you know, with respect to that as well, there's the side of having some standardization around, you know, how ensuring that all the different players that are trying to build solutions are building the same type rather than a competing standard. And so the W3C has done a lot of great work in terms of trying to build a standardization, which I know you guys are involved with. We've been involved there as well. And so I think you definitely need to have both sides of it, and you need to have everybody come into the table and say, okay, these are the set of, you know, this is the sandbox that we're going to play in. And then the way that they actually build the user experience is certainly a specific decision that can be done company to company. So I think you need to have better experience, add more business value or user value, and then also play within the standards that are being developed and implemented or proclamated throughout the world. And I think if you have that right combination, you know, you'll see a little bit of success. So those would be the things that I'd focus on.
Yeah, I think identity is an interesting topic, and Samir, I was going to ask you kind of as a tangential question to what he was just describing. You know, for blockchain cloud computing, I mean, do you feel there's enough process there for business to really leverage these technologies? You know, whether it's through cloud computing or somewhere else, for you to be able to leverage it.
You think that there's enough process for companies to leverage blockchain technology?
Yeah, like, you know, within the governance, compliance, you know, being able to again, kind of adopt that technology. And so, for example, with yourself,
Yeah.
where you work with a lot of different users, there's a lot of different mechanisms there in terms of interacting with the business side, the information you're getting, the users you're interacting with. So I'm just curious, kind of from your perspective, whether that's you know, that's a good thing, bad thing, and whether there's enough there for you to be able to leverage it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that there's like multiple standards for blockchain, I think as you're developing products and you're kind of new in the tinkering phase, I think the one thing you always wonder about is how do people who kind of end users that adopt blockchain or opt in through a different technology, how will that integrate with, you know, let's say an ArcBlock? If we're using ArcBlock, how will people using a different platform, how will ultimately those things integrate and talk with each other, and what all's involved with that? So yeah, I mean, when you're thinking about scaling through cloud computing, you know, the desire is that at some point, I guess the desire is at some point that people kind of coalesce to either some standards, and then the ability to kind of communicate with different platforms.
So Tyler, this question's for you, and I think kind of along those same lines. I'll kind of start with you, and actually I think Samir as well. one of the things I know I'm really interested in as well is kind of the convergence of IoT, AI, blockchain. It's something we hear a lot about, that really one kind of feeds the other, and potentially has the capacity to make the technology much stronger. And for example, machine learning and AI is a great example of, you have a system where it does a lot of really interesting things, but I don't necessarily know why it makes the decisions it does. Whereas blockchain is actually the opposite side of that, and it's very controlled. It's a trusted mechanism and whatnot. Do you think that cloud computing is the part that can actually bring those together better? And how would that actually work, especially along the lines of like decentralized identity and leveraging that tech to do that?
Yeah, Matt, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? It cut out there for like 15 seconds.
Yeah, it was. So the question is around so cloud computing and whether cloud computing and blockchain will increase the ability for the convergence of technologies like AI, machine learning, IoT, and for example, creating trust between those systems in terms of doing that.
Yeah, I'm probably not super qualified to answer the question. I would say, in short, yes. I think it makes a lot of sense as to why it could be the sort of the hub for the spokes of all the different technologies that are going to have some interoperability or some connection to one another. And so cloud could definitely be the thing that ties it all together. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's sort of how things are done at the moment anyway, and I don't see that trend changing. I don't know, Samir, if you have something to add there, but that would be my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think I think the challenge with AI is that you need lots of data, you need labeled data, and if you don't have labeled data, there's different ways around, strategies around getting that with like kind of varying degrees of success in terms of accuracy. But I think the key thing is, with people giving data or providing like sort of like data associated with them, the hope is that that can be that it's always anonymized. But then anonymized data, can still, it's not 100%. There's always this fear that it's somewhat, not 100% anonymized, right? And there's a lot of thought. I mean, just in AI in general, there is a lot of thought, especially with the large companies who are kind of leading the charge, like, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, all the large companies that are leading the charge in AI. There's a lot of thought around fairness, this whole idea of AI and fairness in the models that we build and that companies build, and making sure that you're eliminating bias, and because the models can actually kind of, as much as you try to avoid bias kind of coming out, you still have to kind of take pains into monitoring that and then updating models. And so there is this kind of I guess when you think about blockchain, you think about all the hundreds of thousands of pieces of metadata. This gets a little bit kind of crazy, but you think about hundreds of thousands of pieces of metadata that is associated with us as individuals. And if you actually control that kind of identity and all of your metadata, which could be a million different things, whether it's health, or that's where the scenarios become endless. Then it's kind of like, how do you give consumers the control of what they're actually sharing 100%, and making sure that's anonymous and anonymized, and making sure that whole process is transparent, and then when people are opting in, that they're able to opt into that. So for me, when I think about the collection of all those things you just talked about, Matt, I think about, blockchain. I'm not sure if it is the solution, but it's the only solution I can think of right now that exists. that has potential to sort of like, figure out how to manage identity in the safest way. And we're not there yet, but I do. That's for me, when I think of its potential, that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing. And Tyler, that I think his response led me to the question. This is a pretty a wide question, but pretty straightforward. I mean, do you think, based on that, is decentralized identity the future of the internet?
I think in the big picture of things, the macro level, I do believe that that's the case. As we go back over the few years, and we've seen many years, but over the last 3 or 4, I think end users and consumers are starting to really see firsthand how dangerous it can be when there's large slews of their personal information that they have zero control over, that exists in some company's database somewhere. They don't have any control over it, and that is becoming problematic with the things like the Equifax breaches and the Cambridge Analyticas of the world. And so it's going to be a long process before we go into a model where that data is truly managed by an individual. But I think as people start to realize how valuable all of that information is and how dangerous it can be if it's in the wrong hands, they're going to want to start taking control over that. And so how that process evolves over time is yet to be said, but it will happen. And I think people are starting to sort of become awake to the fact that this is some scary stuff when it's in the wrong hands. So that's my belief, and we'll see what happens over the next 10 to 15 years.
I think well said. I think like transparency, giving people control over their own information. I mean, I think how we can get to there, we can't get there fast enough. And in the spirit of this conversation, if you really recognize, I mean, kind of we're in this time of pandemic. We've got contact tracing, potentially could be something that's integrated with blockchain technology. People are getting more reluctant to kind of spend time with each other, and sure, this time will pass, but the behavior has been changed, at least somewhat, right? And consciously or unconsciously. So thinking about that, I totally agree with what Tyler said. I mean, honestly, we can't get there fast enough, and that again gives credence to the fact we need more people. We need this to be adopted more. We need this to kind of go faster, and that's why I think like having some of these companies kind of step forward is kind of a good thing for the whole industry. But I do agree, like making sure that other companies are kind of taken along so that you don't halt innovation is also a must.
So I know we're getting close to the end of the session here. And again, thanks to both of you guys for taking the time to share and talk about, both kind of what you guys are doing, but also thoughts on cloud computing, blockchain. What I was hoping to do to maybe kind of close out is leave you guys both with an opportunity just to talk about one thing that you would want to share with the ArcBlock community, and maybe something of value or something important, maybe about user interfaces. It's up to you. But Tyler, maybe you want to kick this off?
Yeah, well, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to sort of speak here today. This has been a lot of fun. I think one of the things that I will leave people with is that out of the many problems with decentralized identity, or the approach in terms of how we embrace decentralized identity, one of the things that we can't ignore is the user experience problem. It's been a challenge for sure. I don't think many companies have done a good job with that experience. I think you guys at ArcBlock have done an excellent job. Your wallet is super clean. The experience is really intuitive and very easy to use and understand. And so I would encourage those in the community to continue to adopt and look towards that as a standard, because it will help the adoption curve significantly. And I think you guys have done a very nice job with that. So moving forward, having other solutions or other companies that are in the space, look at that as a standard to match or beat, will be really important, because it'll again help with that user adoption and business adoption. So that would be the thing I'd leave everybody with. And
Yeah, totally agree. Samir?
Yeah, I kind of already said this a few times, but just I feel like we're in a moment here with kind of the state of affairs of the world, that there is an opportunity to create some stickiness, to provide some, if you have, take a user-centric approach like Tyler talked about, make things more user-friendly, and then downstream make things more easily adoptable by end users. I do think that the behavior is changing in the hearts of minds of people, and so I would just be excited about that. I would be excited about that for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you again to both of you guys, and again for sharing your thoughts and whatnot. So here at ArcBlock Devcon 2020, we want to bring together people with lots of opinions, lots of insights, and want to thank you again to both of you. So thank you again.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Samir.
Thanks.